Have you ever noticed how appealing that promise of instant calm is? Or, enlightenment in a neatly packaged app?
Hmm.
Modern spirituality offers so much. Peace, transcendence, often delivered in these bite-sized pieces. It's incredibly alluring.
It really is.
But here's the interesting part, maybe the tricky part. What if our sincerest desire for that transcendence, for rising above our troubles, actually becomes a really sophisticated form of avoidance?
Yeah.
What if it subtly prevents the very integration and healing we think we're seeking? Okay, let's unpack this.
You're touching on a really powerful concept right there. Spiritual bypassing.
Right.
It's a term coined by the transpersonal psychologist John Welwood back in the early 1980s. And it describes this truly pervasive, sometimes beautiful even, and deeply human tendency within contemporary spiritual culture.
Okay.
Welwood observed how sincere seekers were, maybe inadvertently, using their spiritual practices and beliefs to sidestep unresolved emotional stuff, psychological issues.
So using spirituality almost like a shield.
Exactly. A shield against the messiness of just being human.
And that's the core paradox, isn't it? It's not about judging anyone's spiritual journey, not at all.
No.
It's about how this genuine spiritual aspiration can, ironically, prevent the very wholeness we yearn for. Well, would famously put it, something like, we need to be fully human before we can be truly spiritual.
Mm-hmm. That's the quote.
Yeah.
It suggests our humanity isn't some obstacle to get over.
Right. It's the necessary ground, the foundation. So our deep dive today is really all about pulling out the key insights from the sources you share. We want to help you understand the nuances of spiritual bypassing.
Yeah.
Recognize its forms, maybe in yourself, maybe in others. And most importantly, explore genuine paths to integration. We want to shine a light on this shadow so it can become a doorway,
Absolutely. And what's fascinating as we look at the research is that distinct patterns have emerged, almost like personality profiles and how spiritual bypassing shows up. It's not just one thing.
That's right. It's really interesting how these patterns manifest, like different faces we might wear.
Yeah.
Let's start with one you mentioned, the transcendent avoider.
Okay.
This is someone who seems to maintain, well, you called it perpetual spiritual altitude.
Mm-hmm.
They might have deep spiritual knowledge, maybe profound experiences, but the subtle warning sign is that tendency to use concepts like everything is perfect or suffering is an illusion to avoid feeling personal pain,
Right.
or confronting injustice.
Right.
And you'll often find them struggling with real intimacy, perhaps feeling a kind of quiet spiritual superiority.
Yeah, and the hidden cost for this type,
Yeah.
it's significant and often agonizingly subtle. They might seem incredibly serene, right?
Totally.
But they can really struggle with very basic human needs, genuine connection, authenticity, emotional processing. Their relationships might feel ethereal, almost untouchable, but lacking real depth.
Mm-hmm.
And what's insidious is, despite consistent spiritual practices, they might experience these mysterious bouts of depression or anxiety. Because those avoided emotions, they're finding other ways out, less conscious ways.
Wow.
Think about Sarah, the meditation teacher from the case study, longtime practitioner. She sought therapy after a string of failed relationships.
Okay.
And she always labeled her partners as emotionally unstable. But what became clear was that her profound spiritual framework, while beautiful, inadvertently stopped her from acknowledging her own very human needs for security, affection, even healthy conflict.
So the partners weren't unstable.
No, they were just more emotionally honest than she allowed herself to be, basically.
That story really brings home those hidden costs. Okay, then we have the selective transcender. This one sounds incredibly common.
It is very...
These are individuals who apply spiritual concepts, but selectively. Especially when faced with uncomfortable emotions or difficult situations, they might say something like, I focus on the spiritual lesson or growth opportunity here.
Yes, and the pattern here is about when and why they switch modes. That's the key.
Right.
They might, for example, be totally willing to process grief from losing a job through regular therapy, standard stuff.
Makes sense.
But if anger comes up towards, say, a family member, they immediately shift gears, straight to spiritual concepts about forgiveness, letting go.
Skipping the messy part of actually feeling the hurt first.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Skipping that crucial step of fully feeling and understanding the hurt. But the fascinating part is they're often closest to genuine integration.
Oh, why is that?
Because they already engage with both sides' psychological and spiritual approaches. Their growth edge is simply noticing that switch, asking, okay, why am I reaching for the spiritual explanation right now?
That really crystallizes it. Okay, moving along this spectrum. we encounter the balanced explorer. Now, this is presented as a much healthier expression.
Generally, yes. More integrated.
Yeah. There's genuine integration of both spiritual and psychological approaches. Their internal compass might guide them to say something like, I work through my hurt and anger first, then gradually move toward forgiveness.
Right. These individuals are typically highly self-aware. They're open to using multiple ways to grow. They see spiritual development as this continuous journey, not a destination.
But even they have shadows.
Of course. Even the balanced explorer has subtle shadows. Under intense stress, they might still subtly avoid certain emotions that feel truly overwhelming. Or maybe use spiritual practices mainly to manage acute anxiety without quite getting to the root causes. It's just very human.
Yeah, that makes sense. And finally, the integrated seeker. This seems to be the aspiration, the goal for many.
Mm-hmm.
This is about embracing the both-hand nature of being human and divine, wounded and whole. Their approach is more like, I sit with the pain. I allow myself to fully feel it, seeking support when needed.
Exactly. These individuals embody comfort with the full spectrum of human emotion. They can maintain healthy boundaries while staying profoundly open. They seamlessly integrate different approaches to growth. And often they become really authentic guides for others because they're genuinely walking that path themselves.
So we've explored who might be bypassing. Now let's get into the mechanics. How does spiritual bypassing actually work? Beyond just, avoiding feelings, this is where it gets really insightful, I think.
Yeah, it does. One of the core mechanisms is what's called the premature transcendence trap.
Okay, the trap.
Think of it like trying to build the second floor of a house before the foundation is solid.
Right, doesn't work.
It involves attempting to transcend a difficult experience before you've actually processed it. So say after a betrayal, instead of feeling the hurt, the anger, the grief, someone might immediately jump to focusing on the lesson this person was meant to teach me.
Which isn't necessarily wrong in itself, but the timing.
The timing is everything. Finding meaning is valuable, absolutely. But doing it prematurely skips essential emotional work. You haven't digested the experience.
And that often leads to something else you mentioned, the spiritual superiority complex.
Mm-hmm. Bypassing can involve subtle, or sometimes not so subtle, feelings of being more evolved, more awakened than others. It creates this kind of spiritual hierarchy.
You hear the phrases, right? I don't do drama.
Oh, yeah. Or that's just ego. Or even the seemingly benign, I'm sending love and light.
Which sounds nice, but
it can be used to dismiss legitimate concerns or emotions. Someone shares something difficult, and the response is just love and light, which shuts down the conversation.
And that ties into positive spiritual bypassing, doesn't it?
Precisely. This is where positive thinking, gratitude practices, affirmations, they're used not as a genuine expression of how you feel, but to actively avoid feeling or addressing legitimate concerns, injustices, difficult emotions.
Can you give an example?
A powerful one from the sources is responding to real social injustice with just everything happens for a reason. Instead of allowing for appropriate anger, grief, or taking constructive action, it just sidesteps engagement with the reality of the situation.
Wow. It's powerful how our desire for positivity can inadvertently block authentic engagement. Okay, shifting gears a bit. What's the broader cultural context? Why does spiritual bypassing seem so prevalent today? Why does it seem to flourish now?
Well, there are several compelling factors, I think. First, there's what we could call the Instagram spirituality effect. Social media has created this culture where spiritual growth is often curated. It's presented as consistently blissful, serene, aesthetically pleasing.
Perfect yoga poses at sunset.
Exactly. Filtered insights, serene smiles. This creates immense pressure to maintain a spiritual image that simply doesn't include the messy, difficult, profoundly human parts of real growth.
You definitely see that. It's not always the full picture.
Not even close. Then there's the therapeutic spirituality movement. Sometimes modern spirituality gets marketed almost like a quick fix, a cure for psychological suffering, rather than a deeper path that complements psychological health.
Setting up unrealistic expectations.
Right. Expectations for instant transformation, which often feeds right into the accelerated awakening myth, these promises of rapid transformation, instant enlightenment, encouraging people to skip crucial developmental stages that require time, patience, deep integration.
It's like wanting to sprint a marathon without any training.
That's a great analogy. And finally, a really crucial element, the trauma-informed blind spot. Historically, many spiritual communities just haven't had an adequate understanding of trauma, its pervasive effects. This can lead to approaches that inadvertently re-traumatize people, or, conversely, encourage spiritual bypassing as a coping mechanism for unresolved trauma, without offering the tools needed to actually process it safely.
So, given all this complexity, how do we begin to recognize spiritual bypassing in ourselves? It sounds slippery. What are some of the key red flags we should look out for?
Well, for honest self-recognition, it often starts with quiet internal observation. And sometimes, the gentle feedback of trusted friends or a therapist is key. One insidious emotional red flag is a consistently flat emotional range.
Flat, not peaceful.
Right. Many spiritual paths emphasize peace, sure. But true spiritual maturity often means feeling more deeply and authentically, not less. We can easily mistake numbness or detachment for genuine calm.
Okay.
Another is a quick pivot. You feel something difficult and immediately jump to a spiritual interpretation, rather than just allowing yourself to be with the emotion first, letting it breathe.
That makes sense. What about in our relationships? How does it show up there?
In relationships, a big red flag is difficulty with genuine intimacy. Vulnerability. If you find yourself consistently avoiding conflict in the name of spiritual peace, or feeling subtly superior to others when they express distress, those are warning signs. Relationships might feel ethereal, maybe full of spiritual concepts, but lacking true grounded depth. Connection.
And behaviorally?
Behaviorally, watch for premature forgiveness, offering forgiveness before you've actually processed your own hurt. Also, an excessive focus on transcendence while neglecting practical, real-world issues, or a strong resistance to psychological approaches like therapy. Those can all be indicators.
It sounds like it's a full body, full mind experience we need to pay attention to. And speaking of the mind, what does the neuroscience of bypassing tell us? What's actually happening in our brains when we do this?
Yeah, the neuroscience is fascinating. Recent research offers some great insights. Spiritual bypassing often involves a kind of amygdala hijack prevention.
Okay.
Essentially, our prefrontal cortex, the reasoning, logical part of the brain, overrides the amygdala, our emotional processing center, but it does it without allowing for natural emotional integration.
So it offers relief.
Right. Temporary relief from discomfort, yes. But it actually prevents the deeper integration needed for genuine healing. We're basically cutting off the emotional processing pipeline. Additionally, studies on meditation show that while deep spiritual states involve shifts in brain networks, consistently using these states solely to avoid emotional processing can actually create neurological patterns of avoidance. Hardwire it, in a way.
Oh.
The core issue is an integration challenge. Authentic spiritual integration needs coherent communication between multiple brain networks. Bypassing disrupts this by favoring cognitive or transcendent networks over the emotional ones. It creates a split.
So what does this all mean for us? It really suggests the antidote isn't abandoning spirituality altogether.
Definitely not.
But rather integrating spiritual and psychological approaches, creating a more complete path. So what is this path of integration? How do we heal this split?
It's fundamentally about embracing the both-and approach, rather than falling into either thinking.
Okay.
This means simultaneously embracing feeling and meaning, fully experiencing your emotions while also being open to finding spiritual significance eventually.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing individual needs and universal connection, honoring your personal human needs while also connecting to something greater.
Right.
And crucially, it's about human and divine, embracing our full humanity, including our wounds, our imperfections, as the very foundation for spiritual development, not seeing it as an obstacle to get rid of.
That sounds like a much richer, much more whole way to live. For those listening who want to start this integration, what are some practical integration strategies, things you can actually do?
Yeah, practical tools are key. One of the most powerful and accessible is the RAIN practice. You might know it.
Remind us.
Okay. R is for recognize. Simply acknowledge what you are feeling right now. Oh, okay. I'm feeling anger.
Just naming it.
Just naming it. A is for allow. Can you create space for that feeling to be there without judgment? It's not about liking it, just letting it exist for a moment. I is for investigate. Now, this is often where people get stuck. It's not about analyzing or fixing. It's getting curious. What does the feeling need? Where do you feel it in your body? What's underneath this anger? Gently curious.
Okay.
And N is for non-attachment. This means holding the whole experience with a compassionate, open awareness.
Yeah.
Understanding that it's impermanent. It will shift.
RAIN. Recognize, allow, investigate, non-attachment. That's helpful. Any others?
Yeah, another effective strategy is thinking in terms of the three-stage process. First, feel first. Allow the full emotional experience without immediately interpreting it. Just feel.
Stage 1.
Second, understand second, explore the psychological patterns, the readings behind the emotion. Why might this be coming up now?
Stage 2.
And finally, integrate third. Find the spiritual significance, the growth opportunities.
Yeah.
But only after the first 2 stages are genuinely engaged. Don't rush it.
Feel, understand, integrate.
Exactly. You can also think of it as the body-mind-spirit triangle. Using body-centered practices like somatic experiencing. That's a gentle body-oriented therapy for trauma release or breath work. Mind-focused approaches like traditional therapy or cognitive work. And spirit practices like meditation or prayer. All 3 points of the triangle need attention for true integration.
It's really helpful to have those tangible ways to approach this. Are there specific therapeutic approaches that are known to be particularly effective for addressing spiritual bypassing?
Absolutely. Spiritual psychotherapy is one. It explicitly integrates both psychological and spiritual perspectives to develop what you might call spiritual emotional intelligence.
Okay.
Internal family systems, or IFS therapy, is also incredibly effective. It helps us understand our internal parts, how spiritual parts might be protecting other parts that hold pain.
Seeing the different aspects of ourselves.
Exactly. And trauma-informed spiritual direction is vital. It provides guidance that explicitly includes trauma-informed principles, recognizing that bypassing often develops as this sophisticated coping mechanism for unresolved trauma. These modalities really help bridge that gap.
This really is a journey of self-discovery. And interestingly, the sources point out that spiritual bypassing often contains these gifts hidden in the shadow. What are those paradoxical positives?
It's a beautiful realization, isn't it? The very mechanisms we use to avoid growth can, when we understand them, become doorways. People who engage in spiritual bypassing often possess genuine spiritual capacity, a deep longing for connection to the divine. Their challenge is just grounding it. Many are highly sensitive individuals who develop bypassing as a way to manage overwhelming experiences. That sensitivity, when channeled consciously, is a profound gift.
Right.
And the powerful idealism that can sometimes lead to bypassing. When that's grounded in reality, it can become an incredible force for positive change in the world.
So it's not just an individual challenge then. It sounds like a cultural healing is needed too. How can spiritual communities and teachers help foster this integration?
Oh, hugely important. Communities need to cultivate emotional honesty, create safe spaces that welcome the full spectrum of human experience, not just the positive vibes only stuff.
Yeah.
They absolutely must adopt trauma-informed approaches, understanding and accommodating trauma responses rather than inadvertently making things worse. Both thinking and thinking is crucial, holding multiple perspectives, valuing psychological work just as much as spiritual practice.
And safety.
Above all, creating deep psychological safety, where vulnerability isn't just tolerated, but truly seen as sacred.
And spiritual teachers.
They have huge responsibility to model integration through their own personal work, recognize bypassing patterns in students, collaborate with therapists when needed, and teach nuanced, grounded approaches.
That really points towards the future of integral spirituality, doesn't it? Where we see these new trends emerging, like neuroscience-informed spirituality and trauma-informed spiritual practice, all aiming for a more holistic approach.
Indeed. These emerging trends show a maturation, I think, of spiritual culture, moving towards greater embodiment. The promise of integration isn't about trying to transcend our humanity. It's about embracing it more fully, more truly.
How so?
Well, this includes embodied spirituality, grounding transcendent experiences in bodily awareness, relational spirituality, finding the divine through authentic human connection, not in spite of it, shadow-inclusive spirituality, welcoming all aspects of our experience as sacred ground, and service-oriented spirituality, expressing our spiritual development through engaged action in the world. It's really about bringing spirituality down to earth, integrating it into every part of life.
So for you, our listener, to help identify your own patterns, what are some practical exercises for self-assessment you could try?
Okay, a few ideas. You could start with the emotional weather report. For maybe 1 week, try checking in with yourself 3 times a day. Just simply note what emotions you're experiencing. How comfortable are you with them? Do you find yourself trying to immediately change or fix difficult emotions? Maybe by reaching for a spiritual concept? What ideas pop into your head when you feel uncomfortable?
Just noticing the pattern.
Just noticing. Next, try the relationship inventory. Reflect on your closest relationships. Can you express anger, sadness, fear authentically within them? Do you tend to avoid conflict? Maybe telling yourself it's for spiritual peace? Do your relationships feel genuinely deep and intimate, or do they mostly stay on spiritual or philosophical levels? How do others seem to experience you emotionally?
Good questions.
And finally, there's the spiritual consistency check. Notice if you apply spiritual principles consistently across the board. Do you forgive some people much more easily than others? Are there situations where you quickly jump to find a spiritual meaning and others where you don't, even if they're equally challenging? And honestly ask yourself, where might you find yourself feeling spiritually superior to others? These aren't judgments, okay? They're just invitations for honest self-reflection.
Gentle curiosity.
Exactly. Spiritual bypassing really represents one of the most sophisticated psychological defenses we have. It's clever. It allows us to maintain a spiritual identity, even have genuine spiritual highs, while unknowingly avoiding that often difficult, messy work of integration, of healing.
Mm-hmm.
Yet within this very pattern lies a profound invitation, an invitation to wholeness, a wholeness that includes, rather than transcends, our full, vibrant humanity. Like the mystic poet Rumi wrote, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." The invitation of spiritual bypassing, maybe, is to discover that our wounds don't need to be transcended or avoided. They need to be met with such complete presence and compassion that they become the doorways to the very wholeness we seek. It's precisely what Robert Augustus Masters meant when he said, "The goal is not to get rid of our humanity in the name of awakening, but to become more fully human."
Wow.
In this meeting, you see, in this integration, in this full embrace of what it means to be simultaneously human and divine, we find not an escape, but something far more precious. It's the discovery that our humanity itself is sacred ground. Our emotions are intelligent allies. Our relationships are profound altars. And our very struggles, they're the raw material for awakening.
What a powerful thought to leave us with. Your humanity isn't an obstacle, but the very ground for authentic spirituality. Embrace the divine within your full humanity. We really hope this deep dive helps you on your own path to integration and wholeness.